On this episode of DTVC Extra, we're going to finish our look at the Beverly Hills Cop films with Beverly Hills Cop 3 and then Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, right? Because it's 2024, and so Hollywood cannot just give sequels numbers, right? They have to have cutesy names because, Hollywood, they don't go in for cliches in Hollywood, just like Beverly Hills Cop 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's got to be Axel F now. But yeah, we can do myriad prequel movies or origin story movies where it's just one name titles, right? Cruella, Lightyear, Wonka, Furiosa. That was Furiosa, a Mad Max story, so maybe that one doesn't count. I don't know, but yeah. So Hollywood is so creative with stuff, right? That they're so creative they couldn't just do Beverly Hills Cop 4. It has to be Beverly Hills Cop Axel F now in 2024. But anyway, off that rant, we'll get into that in just a minute. There's a little admin stuff that I wanted to cover as well. Recently got the Spotify Wrapped, and the numbers across the board were up this year. We've got more listeners, more people listening to more episodes. So thank you to everybody who's checking out the podcast this year. New fans who've been with us from the beginning. I love all of you being here and hope to keep entertaining you as we go into the next year. This was our first year trying to go every week with episodes. It looks like we're going to meet that goal. I think I can't remember. We started, I think, maybe in February going weekly. I think January was our last week of not going weekly. We did like one more month of the DTVC Extra. But this will be our we'll have pretty much gone the year having a guest every week. We've got everybody scheduled out, so we should be able to pull that off. So, again, thank you everybody for your support on that. I really appreciate that. One other thing I noticed about the Spotify Wrapped is that, one, it tells me what the favorite podcasts were of people who listened to the show. So I think the number one was Knowledge Fight, which kind of makes sense because I mentioned Knowledge Fight a lot on here. So people probably check it out after. I don't know if we have a lot in common with conspiracy, with people who make fun of conspiracists or stuff like that. I did notice on iTunes that they said, in terms of recommending a podcast based off of my podcast, they had Behind the Bastards, which I thought was interesting as well. But between 1 and 5 were like, usual suspects, right? Like Comeuppance was one, I think, After Movie Diner, that kind of thing, Bulletproof. So that was kind of the in-between. But then the fifth one was a Joe Rogan Experience, of whatever that podcast is called. So really fascinating that Rogan fans and Knowledge Fight fans listen to this podcast. It's really interesting stuff. So, hey, whoever you are out there, whatever fans you are listening, love having you listen to the show. Always really appreciate it. But also, keep in mind that when you're listening to stuff on Spotify, they're taking all of that data and they're combining it with everything else to package it into stuff that they can give to people. But they're also using it for themselves, right, to market things and improve their algorithms. So just know that if you listen to whatever song 5 times in a row and then you listen to my podcast, they're putting that data together, and then at the end of the year they're going to tell me, people who listen to your podcast are more likely to listen to this song, that kind of stuff. So you're just being tracked constantly. It's a little different world from what it was when I was growing up, when we had mixtapes, right? That was like, my friend just bought, like Hammer Can't Touch This, something like that. And I go to his house and make a copy of it, right? Nobody knows, other than people that I tell, that I'm listening to Hammers Can't Touch This. But if I were to start streaming Hammers Can't Touch This on Spotify, they're collecting that data and saying, what else would Matt like to listen to if he's listening to MC Hammer? Oh, maybe we'll shoot some Vanilla Ice his way. Maybe some Poison by Bill DeVoe, right? Milli Vanilli, right? Maybe it's, that kind of stuff. So yeah, you're always being tracked. It's one of those things, right? We love that we have, the streamers. We love that we have all of this free music and stuff like that. I guess it's another case for physical media, right? That, unless you're using your credit card to buy the physical media, nobody is tracking what you're watching. So you pop that movie in the VCR, and Tubi has no idea that you're watching that movie. Whereas all the stuff that I watch on Tubi, they're just loading it up and reselling it to me. So, again, I appreciate you listening on Spotify, if you're listening on Spotify, but know that Big Brother is also listening when you're listening, and they're using that information to package it somewhere. I guess it's the same thing too with iTunes, right? When I listen to iTunes, I don't listen to music on either. A lot of the music I do Spotify though. I do have Spotify, and I'll put together like playlists for my writing. But I don't listen to podcasts. It's interesting. All of my podcast listening is done on iTunes, whereas the music is on Spotify. And I guess there is that sense that it could be easier, right? That I could do the two together. But I never really do the two at the same time. Like I usually listen to podcasts when I'm either working or walking or traveling or things like that. Whereas the music, it might be while I'm doing my writing or something like that. So the two are never together. But anyway, but again, thank you for everybody for all the support. I really appreciate it. And, hey, let's try to make 2025 an even better year. I'm going to do my best to kind of get this thing even better than what we have now. Try to improve it and make it even more listenable, something more fun. Now, that said, we're talking about DTVC Extra here. This is going to be the last DTVC Extra for 2024. So I'm going to take the rest of the month off for the DTVC Extra. The main pod will still be having episodes every week. So every Tuesday night, my time, Eastern time, US, you can expect an episode, unless I say otherwise, if I say that there's a delay or something. So that's still going to happen. But the DTVC Extra, this will be the last episode of that for this year. Then we'll see what happens in January. So if I want to come back to it, do it again or not. Just things have been a little busy, and so that extra podcast has been a little bit harder to do. So, but we'll see what happens there. All right, I think that's kind of everything for my initial admin stuff that I wanted to get into, and a little bit of ranty stuff too about Hollywood not wanting to use numbers for sequels and Big Brother watching you on Spotify. But yeah, why don't we get stuck in here on Beverly Hills Cop 3? So Beverly Hills Cop 3 comes out in 1994. It is 10 years after the first film, 7 years after the second film. And my understanding is that Paramount wanted to get the third film out sooner, so maybe more like 1990. And Bruce Willis, or sorry, not Bruce Willis, Eddie Murphy was saying no. He wanted to do other things. He felt like he had done enough with Axel Foley, and he wanted to move on to other projects. And I think we get some real gems out of that period, right? We get Harlem Nights, we get Coming to America, of course. And so he does get some really good stuff out there. He's also still continually making money, though. He has that one dud in there, which is Distinguished Gentleman. I think it had like a $30 million budget in that, or it had a $60 million. So I don't know what it was, but it didn't make its money back. It didn't do as well. But I think Distinguished Gentleman came out as Beverly Hills Cop 3 was in production. So it didn't affect the fact that it made Eddie Murphy take Beverly Hills Cop 3, that he changed his mind on it. But I think what it did is it affected Paramount's decision on how much budget they wanted to put into Beverly Hills Cop 3. So interesting stuff there. But finally, Eddie Murphy does relent on it. He relents in a way that he also wants Jonathan Landis to direct the film. He and Landis had an interesting relationship. They did Trading Places together. Really enjoyed working together on that one. Then they did Coming to America. Didn't get along well at all. Landis also took it personally that when he was on trial for that the people who died making Twilight Zone the movie, that I think that was the movie, right? Twilight Zone the movie, that Eddie Murphy didn't step up for him on that. So he was kind of annoyed about that, and there's a lot of tension there. But yet Eddie Murphy was still happy to work with him on this film here. So we'll get into that in a second. One thing I want to touch base on too is with Coming to America, because that's probably one of the more successful ones that he has between Beverly Hills Cop 2 and Beverly Hills Cop 3. It might be the most successful of all those movies in between. When 2023, we had the whole, Barbie, Oppenheimer, Super Mario 3 thing. People like to call it Barbenheimer, I think, right? Because you got to have a cute name for everything nowadays, too, right? Used to be that we saved the cute name for tabloids talking about celebrity couples, but now we just do it for everything. I guess that's what you have to do. But somebody, I think it was Bill Simmons maybe on his podcast, had said that the 2023 was the first time since 2001 that the top 3 earners for the year weren't sequels, right? So the top 3 earners in 2001, let me see if I can do it off the top of my head. But it's like the Harry Potter movie, it was the Lord of the Rings, the first Lord of the Rings movie, and the first Monsters, Inc. movie. Those were your top 3 earners for that year. And so none of them were sequels, but they spawned sequels, right? So he said that it was also the first time since 1988 that the 3 movies didn't spawn sequels, except for the fact that now there was that Coming to America legacy sequel. So then the next one would be 1982. And I'm trying to think what the top 3 movies from 1982 were. See if I could do it. I was trying to think if I could do it off the top of my head. It's Tootsie. So for 1988, it was Coming to America, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Rain Man. Which, imagining a movie like Rain Man, I mean, I guess it's kind of the same as Oppenheimer being the second highest gross. The fact that a Rain Man would be number one only back then it was a little bit more believable that a Rain Man could be the number one. But anyway, yeah, I was trying to think for 1982. So it was E.T., Tootsie, and Officer and a Gentleman. So none of those movies have had sequels yet. So it was like kind of the first time since then that the top three earners not only weren't sequels, but also didn't spawn sequels, which I kind of think that second piece doesn't really matter as much. Because one, if you push it out to 5 movies, right? So if it's the top 5 earners that year, you have to go back to like 1969 for that. And that's if you count Easy Rider's direct-to-video, extremely low-budget sequel, where some guy, some amateur filmmaker, got the rights to Easy Rider's sequel and made something with a woman from Walker, Texas Ranger. Was it like Cherie Johnson, I think, or something? I can't remember. Sherelle. I haven't seen it, but it looks atrocious just from the images and stuff like that. And if you count that as a sequel, then even then 1969 wouldn't count. But the reason why I think that second bit about the movies not spawning sequels doesn't matter as much is because from Hollywood's standpoint, if a movie does really well, they're going to try to push a sequel, right? They're at least one of the top earners. The fact that in 1988 we had those 3 and didn't have a sequel. I think the other one in 1988 was Crocodile Dundee 2. I think that was the 4th highest one for that year. So you still had a sequel. Yeah, Crocodile Dundee 2 and then Twins. So of course Twins didn't have a sequel. So interesting, right? That until we get that legacy sequel for Coming to America, actually 4 of the top 5 films didn't spawn sequels and also weren't sequels. So that's a rare thing that you see, especially nowadays. It's really rare. And it does underscore how rare 2023 was. I think we're probably going to see a Barbie sequel. I think we'll see a Super Mario sequel. Would be funny if we had an Oppenheimer sequel, but probably won't. But it's kind of I don't know. I think just the fact that you have 3 movies, that aren't sequels is a big enough deal. The other thing I would say too about that 1988 year that makes it a little bit more a bigger deal than the 2001 year is not only are those 3 movies, I guess, yes, Coming to America has a legacy sequel now. So, but just for the sake of argument, they also aren't established franchises. I guess Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it felt like it could have. I think it spawned certain things like merchandising. But, Barbie is an established franchise. Super Mario is an established franchise. So just like in 2001, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings were established franchises they were adapting into movies. So they had an established audience. Where that 1988 year, it is kind of a bit of a unicorn. Could we say that? It's a bit of a rarity. Even with 1982, when you look at that one, the other 4 and 5 top earners for that year after we get past An Officer and a Gentleman was, I think we had First Blood was number 4 and Rocky 3 was the 5th earner. So again, we're still having franchises or starts of franchises there as we round out the top 5. But anyway, it was one of those things where Eddie Murphy did make a really good splash there with Coming to America, but I think he felt like he wasn't getting something out of the movies. I think there was a sense that he was seen as this goofy comedic guy and he wanted something more serious. So I think he went into this Beverly Hills Cop 3 movie looking to play it a little bit more serious. And that's where we kind of start to get this sort of unraveling and this sort of sauteed and wrong sauce thing. So maybe I'll get stuck in here on Beverly Hills Cop 3 just because we're already 13 minutes in on this segment here between my opening stuff and then this sort of the sidebar thing on Coming to America. But the movie itself, it takes place in 1994, so it's around the time the time it comes out, and it starts off with Gil Hill, or Inspector Todd, I guess. I can't, but anyway, he gets killed in this botched raid of a chop shop that Axel runs, and Axel has this raid of the chop shop. Part of the reason why it's botched is because he doesn't want to call in SWAT because he thinks it's just a bunch of guys chopping cars. But instead, we get some of the most nondescript baddies ever who are just baddies by the sheer fact that they have Uzis, right? And they're gunning people down with Uzis and shotguns or in pistols and things like that. So, which of course is always interesting. I was trying to think of who we had here for baddies. So we have Timothy Carhart is the one who, he's your main baddie. And I was trying to think what he'd done before because he's very nondescript. It's for a movie of this quality, to kind of go from the baddies that we had before, where we had Steven Berkoff, we had Jürgen Prochnow, to go to Timothy Carhart. It's very fascinating, right? He's doesn't really known for much else. I liken him to like a smarmy, jerky character, but like quirky, jerky character in a Seinfeld episode. Like that's kind of who he is. And then what we had Lindsay Gintner as the sort of the hatchet man for that baddie. And you see him in stuff. He's kind of just always kind of floating around. I was trying to remember, there was a big role that he did. I had it written down, and of course I never I always kind of forget where I find these things. But he was in Mercenary, of course. If you think of that one, that was a good one there that we've reviewed on the site before with Olivier Gruner and John Ritter, right, of all people, that's in a movie like that John Ritter. So he's kind of somebody who's floated around, who's done these parts. But again, for a blockbuster movie in the late '80s to have it be Lindsay Ginter as the right-hand man, Timothy Carhart as the main baddie, and then of course John Saxon is also in there. Even then, John Saxon, I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street, but a lot of like non-SAG Italian production parts, things like that. So again, interesting that those are who we've got for our characters. The other thing with this one is we don't have John Ashton, right? He's not in this one, and so because he's not in it, we get Hector Elizondo, who I guess that's a different one, right? I would say if you were gonna have to sub out Ashton, you wouldn't want to sub him out, but if you had to, Hector Elizondo is probably where you'd want to go with that. So I guess that one's a little bit better. But the other thing, we have no Bogomil, right? We have no Ronnie Cox. So according to the trivia on this, the reason why we don't have those two is that Ashton had other projects going on. Ronnie Cox had other projects as well, but he said he would have been willing to do it, but then he saw that his character was supposed to be killed off. So when they kill off Gil Hill's character, that was supposed to be Ronnie Cox's character being killed off. And they just subbed in Gil Hill for it and just had it take place in Detroit as opposed to take place in Beverly Hills. Also, we've got Joey Travolta in this opening sequence as one of the Detroit cops doing the raid. So anytime we get some Joey Travolta, or as Ty said, one of the, I think it was the Wilding trailer where he's referred to as Joy Travolta, which is great too. That all works. But we get some kind of funny stuff in that sequence. We get some the Chop Shop guys are dancing to the Supremes, and then when Eddie Murphy shows up, of course the baddies have shown up and they've massacred everybody. That's a very classic 80s 90s trope, right? Is that the baddies massacred the other baddies that they would be working with, right? It was which was an interesting idea when you're a business person, that you're just going to work with somebody and they're just going to massacre you when it's over. But that's kind of how baddies worked. They wore suits, they had Uzis, and it was like leave no witnesses. And suddenly the guys were like, oh no, they're like diving away or whatever. But yeah, so when the SWAT team comes in, they happen upon this situation. Gil Hill dies, and Eddie Murphy swears revenge. And he's at the funeral. The secretary from Becker is Gil Hill's wife in the movie. The funeral is the song at the funeral is sung by Al Green, so you gotta love that. I think that would have been a sufficient enough time for him to have recovered from his hot grits incident, where a young woman that was not happy with him dumped hot grits on him. He recovered enough from that he could be there at that funeral singing the eulogy for Gil Hill, or Inspector Todd. But anyway. But he's vowing revenge, so he goes out. Eddie Murphy goes back out to Beverly Hills, meets up with Rosewood, who Rosewood is working at he's like some kind of city coordinator of police, right? Because Beverly Hills is kind of, if you look on a map, Beverly Hills is sort of in this island amongst other LA. Territories that are part of LA, places like Brentwood, things like that. So it's kind of its own thing. And so it's jurisdictionally, how does it work? As an aside, here in Philadelphia, it was a similar situation. The reason why the entire county of Philadelphia is the city is because it used to be within the county. Like a lot of places that are now Philadelphia were towns outside, like places like South Philadelphia, where I live, or Spring Garden, places like that. And I guess criminals would just scoot across those lines, and the police couldn't do anything because they didn't have jurisdiction. And so finally they just decided, we're going to just make the whole county, the whole county is the city. So they're sort of equal parts. It means the city's bigger. There's places way out in the Northeast that I don't even know if I'll ever go to. It's interesting taking the train, back in here to Philadelphia, and you're like, oh, well, I'm in Philadelphia now, right? Like I can see street signs and everything like that are the Philadelphia style. But I'm not really close to where I live. I'm 10, 20 miles away because of how big it is, because of the way it's set up. But anyway, so yeah, Rosewood, Judge Reinhold, he's coordinating this effort here, and then Hector Elizondo, I guess, is a cop. I don't know exactly what he's doing. But we find out that these baddies are all tied up with this theme park called Wonder World, and so Hector Elizondo, he wants to get a job working security at Wonderworld. We found out that this smarmy Seinfeld jerky character, who's the baddie, he's like the head of security for this Wonderworld place. And so, as the movie goes on, Eddie Murphy knows that this is the guy who killed Gil Hill. He wants to get the revenge. People don't really believe him because that's kind of what happened, so he's got to prove his case. Teresa Randall is in this. If you remember her from I don't know if it was both Hunt for Eagle ones or if it was like just one of the two, but she did this. So we've seen her on the site before. She plays a former security or former higher up who gets kind of pushed out when the smarmy Seinfeld guy takes over as the baddie. And so she's kind of like when Eddie Murphy shows up, she wants to help him because she knows this smarmy guy is not up to any good. And so eventually they kind of uncover what's going on here. It turns out it's a counterfeiting ring, but at the same time they're producing their own money. I do remember at this time going to Disney World with my family. My mom always loved to do these trips to Disney World, and I remember they had Mickey dollars. I think they're Disney bucks or something like that. And you'd get it would have Mickey Mouse in the center where Washington or wherever it'd be, and it'd be like $5, and you could spend it on stuff at the amusement park. It was kind of obnoxious, right? But that's one of the things they did. It's actually, you think about it, it's the forerunner to like Starbucks with their app, with the wallet in the app, where it's like you have to keep reloading the app, reloading money in the app, and you can only reload it in certain denominations, so it's really hard to zero out. I think I got myself down to 25 cents on my Starbucks app, so I don't go to Starbucks anymore. But it's kind of a forerunner to that, right? If you put your money into Disney dollars, you get a discount maybe, but you can only spend them in the park, right? So they're only good there. So you kind of behooves you if you put like $20 in to spend all $20 as opposed to maybe spending $15 and taking $5 home with you. So that was kind of the format. But the idea was these guys were using their Wonder World dollars that they were creating as a front for the fact that they were actually counterfeiting real money. Eventually, Eddie Murphy and Axel Foley, he uncovers the whole thing unravels. He takes the baddies down, and that's it. We're done here. In terms of this movie, I don't think it's as good as the first two. I don't think it's as bad as, say, like Eddie Murphy says it is. I mean, it got killed critically. None of the critics were fans of this. They destroyed it. From a money standpoint, it did okay. It did about double its budget, but I think the previous movies had done so much better. They were expecting a windfall here. They were expecting a lot more money, and the fact that it doesn't earn that, I think, really, really kind of hurts them in this situation here. To give you a sense, okay, this movie makes double its budget. The previous one made over 10 times its budget back, right? So that should give you a sense of like how not so good this movie did. There's a few reasons for why that was. Eddie Murphy, again, there's some questions about whether he wanted to make a more serious film. There's a sense that he didn't want to make this movie at all, and he was kind of just making it because maybe he needed a win, and he wasn't getting wins, and at least wins to the tune that he was getting before, right? So he's getting wins. I mean, something like Coming to America. We talked about was a top 3 earner for its year. I think it was the only one that he had after Beverly Hills Cop 2 that was a top earner for its year. The other ones did well. They just didn't do Beverly Hills Cop 2 well. And he was looking for a Beverly Hills Cop 2 style win, so he kind of resigned himself to just, I'm just going to do this, but his heart wasn't in it. So the comedy wasn't there. He also he wanted to kind of get credit for being a more dramatic actor. So he also toned down the comedy, which John Landis wasn't expecting. Kind of similar to the Pluto Nash situation, right? That director was expecting Eddie Murphy to come in and punch up the script and make it funnier. Landis was expecting something similar here. I think the tension between the two of them was also sort of coming to a head, even if they say it didn't. It kind of made things more difficult. Bronson Pinchot said it was hard to act with him, and actually there were scenes where he didn't act with him. There were a lot of scenes where Bronson Pinchot was delivering his lines to John Landis because Eddie Murphy just wasn't responding properly and it wasn't working. So you can kind of see that stuff, right? That kind of stuff comes through in the movie. He also complained that the baddies weren't good. That I can definitely agree with. I've been saying it the whole time, right? We got a smarmy, I mean, this is essentially like, what is it? Is it Niedermeyer from Animal House that's the maestro on Seinfeld? I mean, that you got like a lower rent version of that. It's funny. I don't know if the actor Timothy Carhart did a Seinfeld episode. I feel like he should have if he didn't. He could have been like one of Elaine's boyfriends, right? Who's like a real jerk or something like that. And she's like, I don't know how to dump him, well, take him over to this restaurant. That's a great, whatever. But I don't see him on a Seinfeld episode. So he did, it doesn't look like he did. So he did kind of a lot of other stuff though, similar to that. So, but that's who you've got here for the, but also the second in command baddie, when you think of the first two movies, right? The second movie, we've got Brigitte Nielsen in that role. So somebody really special is playing kind of the second in command after, after Jürgen Prochnow. That's kind of cool there. I like that, as it's more inspired, right? Whereas this one here, having Lindsay Ginter, again, Lindsay Ginter he's a great hatchet man baddie for I don't want to say direct to video, syndicated TV show, right? Syndicated action, like Renegade. He did Renegade episodes, so that makes sense, right? That he would be that kind of guy in a big budget movie of this caliber. You're not supposed to get Lindsay Ginter. That's not who you get in that role. So I think that kind of thing, I don't know, that to me it feels lower rent. It feels like this wasn't like the big budget movie that it was supposed to be, and that kind of stuff comes through. The same time, and I was talking with Todd Liebenow about this. He brought this up in terms of stunt work. Some of the stunts in this movie were fantastic. I mean, you got like the whole amusement park thing with the Ferris wheel, and he's like, or not a Ferris wheel, but whatever that thing was, it was like had these like cages of people sitting in it, and they're kind of getting whipped around. And of course, Lindsay Ginter, because he's not a good hatchet man, he's like borking up the machine while he's trying to get, because Axel Foley's snuck onto one of those things to escape them when they're trying to get him. And so he borks up the machine, trying to get him to come down. And then, Foley's got to save two kids and everybody's cheering and all that stuff. That was a really cool scene. And there were some really good stunts there. There was some good stuff. But, I don't know that it was quite the level of the stuff in the first two movies. I mean, the way we start that first film with the garbage, or not with the big, the big truck chase, with the cigarette truck chase with a neutron bomb playing in the background. That stuff's really great. Or Shakedown playing, or The Heat Is On. All that kind of stuff made that more fun. This didn't quite have it. The other thing too is they got Nile Rodgers to punch up the Axel F theme. So I think there was almost a sense too of like, we want to modernize this movie. And when I remember the commercials when this movie came out. I didn't see this in the theater. I thought I did, but when I thought about it after, I realized that no, I didn't see it in the theater. And actually, I would have been 15, so I guess I could have been signed in. I don't remember seeing it after the fact. I think 1994 again. That was that sort of that big indie year that I've talked about on here before, and I think 15-year-old Matt was starting to get too cool for those kinds of things. Like, oh, do I need to see another Beverly Hills Cop movie? They're just trying to make money, I don't really need to see that. Look, why don't I go watch Bad Lieutenant? We're gonna rent Bad Lieutenant with Harvey Keitel. That's much better use of my time than Beverly Hills Cop 3. Watching it now, I think I could give it a little bit more credit than that, but I think that was kind of my mindset back then. I was getting to be too cool for school, teen, alternative Matt guy, who, wasn't going to be into that kind of thing. And so I think watching it now, I think as I was watching it this time, I was realizing that I don't think I had seen it before. There is a kind of a feel, like a kind of a desultory sort of perfunctoriness to this film that I think hurts it overall. I think Paramount needed a win. Eddie Murphy needed a win. Landis, I think, needed a win after the trial and all of that stuff. And when you go into a movie feeling you need a win, it can work. I think Deadpool and Wolverine is an example of it working. But you still need to have a certain level of passion. I think that's the difference maybe between Deadpool and Wolverine and this movie, is that Paramount, Eddie Murphy, Landis, they needed a win, but they were, because they all needed a win, they made this movie without really wanting to make it. They made it because they felt like they had to make it. I think with Deadpool and Wolverine, Ryan Reynolds wanted to make Deadpool and Wolverine, right? That was a passion project for him, something he really wanted to do. And then, Kevin Feige, Bob Iger, they needed a win, so they gambled on letting Ryan Reynolds do his thing, and it worked. in that case. So maybe that's what it is that if you're Paramount and you need a win, find somebody who's really passionate and really wants to get something done, and then have them do it. I think that's the thing about this, is that because of that perfunctory nature of it, even though you get these inspired moments that really work, and overall it's a fun movie. I think that's the other piece too, is that I can maybe go back to it 30 years later, as I'm older, I'm less full of myself, I'm less Mr. Pretentious, so cool watching indie movies, Matt. Which it's funny, I say that, Mr. Too cool, pretentious movies watching Matt, but I like the low budget actioners, right? I still had a thing for those, maybe because it was ironic. I don't know. I think I just appreciated it. And that was maybe another piece of it, right? Is that I would look at a Beverly Hills Cop that's being, kind of a cash grab thing and a big budget thing and be like, this is crap. I'm going to go watch, Showdown in Little Tokyo. I'll show all of you. That's a much more fun actioner, much better use of my time than a Beverly Hills Cop 3. Now that I'm older, I can kind of look back on a Beverly Hills Cop 3 and kind of see some of those inspired moments like Todd was talking about. I can't remember which podcast episode he was on when we talked about it, but he mentioned some of those features. And I can appreciate them better now. It works for me a little bit better. But it is kind of too bad too. It would have been interesting to see what this thing could have been if, one, the budget was better. I think one of the problems was they cut the budget down, and Eddie Murphy was already getting a huge cut just to be in the movie, so he was getting a big amount. And again, Paramount looked at it and said, we don't want to fully fund this thing. We don't want to put so much money on this thing because Distinguished Gentleman just did poorly. So Eddie Murphy's box office gold is done, right? If this thing's going to work, it's going to kind of be more of a surprise, and it's going to be, we can just keep banking on him. So I think that shows in at least in the casting. Some of this casting. You thinking about like Showdown in Little Tokyo. A PM Entertainment flick, especially Joey Travolta, right? We think of what is Da Vinci's Inquest or whatever. Da Vinci's Inquest is the show. Da Vinci's War. Da Vinci's Inquest is the detective show from Calgary in Canada, CBC. Da Vinci's War. But when you get a Joey Travolta, when you get a John Saxon, when you get again Timothy Carhart as your main baddie, that's again, it's a correction they're going to make in this fourth movie when they get Kevin Bacon in there. And again, Prochnow, Steven Berkoff, those were like 80s big budget baddies. You see those guys in the movie and you're just like, yeah, just chew the scenery, sit there in your nice suit, smoking cigarettes, saying all these really, clever, sophisticated, but vile, villainous lines, and kind of just do your thing. This just didn't cut it there on that score. So all that to say, I think this is a fun one if you're doing a threefer, but it's also a letdown if you're doing a threefer. If you're doing 1, 2, and then you do this one before you do 4, it is a bit of a dip. It is a bit of a letdown. This is probably the one that if you're binging them with friends and you're watching all 3, this might be the looking at your phone, like, snacking, talking kind of thing, and then like looking up for certain sequences, catching certain pieces kind of movie. I don't know that it's a full-on one, but again, also, you're talking about an hour and 45 minutes for a big budget actioner. It's still fun enough in that sense, and I liked it there. So one last thing that I did appreciate about this movie, I always talk about the different Chekhovs, right? Think of Chekhov's gun, and I love that we had Chekhov's alien attack, right? Chekhov's law, right? If you introduce a theme park ride called Alien Attack or Alien Assault, whatever it was called, if you introduce Alien Assault in the first act, you need to use it in the final act when the baddies are trying to attack the hero. And I absolutely loved that. I loved that Axel Foley remembered exactly the beats of when the different pieces would come so that he could lure the baddies into, when the building was falling down and the water was rushing through and all of that kind of stuff. That was a beautiful, inspired scene. So, like I said, there are a lot of really great moments like that work in this film. It's just overall, this was... It wasn't inspired. It was 3 parties, director, actor, studio, that needed a win, and this is what we got. So so why don't we take a break here? We'll wrap this one here, and then when we come back, we'll finish this thing up with Axel F. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. All right, we are back. And before we get into Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, I did want to touch base on a few things from the previous segment that I caught that I made mistakes on. One, when they talk about that earlier scene when I mentioned about the raiding the chop shop, I said SWAT raided the chop shop, even though they called SWAT off, right? It was the guys when they raided the chop shop. So I just kind of messed that one up there saying that. And then Jonathan Landis, a couple things I made mistakes on there. One, I must have drawn a blank on Vic Morrow's name when I said the people who died on the Twilight Zone movie. But Vic Morrow, right, is the one who dies. But also, it wasn't Jonathan Landis didn't need a win because of the Twilight Zone movie. Obviously, Coming to America was a big enough hit for him. But the two movies between Coming to America and Beverly Hills Cop 3 are the duds that he needed the win for. I mean, Oscar, I had forgotten about Oscar. And of course, talking about the Rambo movies, I probably should have mentioned Oscar. I mean, what a fascinating film that kind of, in that early 90s period with people trying to, I don't know what they were doing. It's not on any of the streamers, but it seems like an interesting enough film that I've got to see it. I remember it coming out and not being a fan, but it's interesting. And then also he did a movie called Innocent Blood that was like almost 2 hours long, kind of a dark comedy vampire film that I barely remember being out as well, but also didn't do well. So yeah, he needed something. He needed something for Beverly Hills Cop 3. So he needed to win just as much as Eddie Murphy and Paramount did. So that for sure. Then one final thing was I was starting to talk about how this Beverly Hills Cop 3 was an updated kind of a version of the previous two movies, and I was talking about the commercials. And what I really was trying to get at why I didn't go see the movie was there's that commercial that showed the scene where he tries to go to see Rosewood, and he's like trying to talk to that box that like there was like some sort of answering service or whatever where you had to push buttons to get your to the party you're talking to, and the thing doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's talking to it, and it's this big Eddie Murphy laugh kind of thing. And I remember that being in the commercial and just being like, yep, cash grab. Yeah. Oh, how funny it is that Eddie Murphy's got to deal with an answering service thing or whatever that, when he's trying to pull up and he's pushing the buttons or whatever, and he just abandons the car. So it was kind of more of that cliche stuff that I was just like, okay, I've seen enough of those jokes, to that point that was just another, reason why I didn't want to see the movie. But I realized I jumped right into why I didn't see the movie. When I kind of was bringing that part up. So I figured I'd just kind of quickly mention that because those commercials at that time in '94, I think they didn't do the movie any favors. It didn't look like it was an inspired movie. I mean, there was the funny thing about him going to the chop shop and, is this the illegal chop shop? Because, that kind of thing. That kind of seemed funny enough, but it looked very paint by numbers. It didn't look like an inspired film, and I think that's why a lot of people didn't go see it either. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Despite how poorly this movie, Beverly Hills Cop 3 did, Paramount did want another film. They were pushing for another one. Eddie Murphy was saying no, at least through the rest of the 90s. And then, of course, we know there's the situation where he is caught with a trans sex worker, and he starts doing kind of more family films. Nutty Professor does really well for him. He starts making more of those. He was still making actioners, though, too, because he made Metro. Remember that one with Michael Rappaport? Remember that commercial, right? The big reveal where Michael Rappaport, I think he walks into a room and then he has to close his eyes and tell Eddie Murphy everything he sees in the room, and he's like naming off all these things. He's like, yeah, and there's a sale on toilet paper, and that was like the big, oh man, we gotta go see Metro. That looks great. What was the other one? Showtime, right? Was that the one he did with Robert De Niro, kind of later into the '90s? But kind of dudsy kind of stuff. But the family things, the Nutty Professor movies were doing really well for him. Meet the Clumps or whatever, that kind of stuff, right? Daddy Daycare, those were working, and I think he was kind of leaning into that more just because it was making him money. He did have some inspired films, right? Bowfinger, I think, was kind of a funny one in there. Also, Life, right? I think that was that what it was called, Life. The one that he did with Martin Lawrence. That was another one that was big for him. That it did trick, and of course, he does the voice work on Shrek, which is making him a lot of money as well. But there's still a sense that he, Life was the name of the movie. There's still that sense though that Paramount wants another Beverly Hills Cop film. And so I think it's like a '06. They looked like they had something going. They started moving into production. He was still kind of saying he didn't want anything to do with it. That he was it wasn't going to happen for him. '09. So the thing's kind of languishing in development hell. '09. They were going to make it with Brent Ratner, and I think he was okay with doing it with Brent Ratner. I think they'd had they did Tower Heist in 2011, so that he kind of knew him, and that was somebody he would want to work with. 2013, he decides instead of doing it with Brett Ratner, he's going to make his own TV show where his son is playing. He's still playing himself, but his son is the one who's the cop in Beverly Hills, and he'll make appearances here and there. But he's going to maybe produce this TV show. I guess he's trying to sell it to CBS, and CBS said no. Which I think at that time CBS and Paramount were linked. They were kind of all together at that point, but maybe not. But yeah, so that once that got squashed, it was like, okay, let's go back to trying to make the movie again. And so again, throughout the 2010s, they're trying to put this thing together. Finally, in 2019, they had something that they thought was going to work. But then we get the pandemic. I think the actor strike also played a part in it. But Paramount decided that instead of putting the movie distributing the movie themselves, I think there was a sense of like they didn't want a big budget, or they didn't want a big screen release for whatever reason. But then there was also the sense of Paramount Plus didn't have the kind of viewership that they would probably want for something like this. So they signed a deal with Netflix. And I believe Netflix has a 2-picture deal. And they are already producing that next movie. So, 2024, Axel F comes out. And again, this is 2024. You can't just have sequels. Remember, Coming to America, it had to be Coming with the number 2 America. You can't just say Coming to America 2. For whatever reason, you can't do that. Despite the fact that probably, like, again, as I've said before, the most successful of the Marvel movies, other than the Avengers ones, were the Iron Man films or the Guardians of the Galaxy films. And they use numbers. I guess Guardians of the Galaxy uses Volume 1, 2, and 3, but they're still using numbers. Hollywood, just go back to using the numbers. Beverly Hills Cop 4 would have been fine for this. You didn't have to call it Axel F, but whatever. They felt like they did. You felt like you can't just call it Beverly Hills Cop 4. It is maybe something of a legacy sequel, but again, when you look through the history of it, it wasn't intended to be a legacy sequel. It was more of like a development hell kind of sequel. But that's quite a bit. 30 years of development hell is a lot of development hell. And so there were a lot of other reasons why that, again, Eddie Murphy not really being interested in it, the attempt to try to make a TV show, all of those kinds of things. But it gets us here, 2024, to this sequel. And yeah, this is an interesting one. I will say that before I decided to do this series of films, I wasn't going to watch this movie. It's listed as almost a 2-hour long film. I'm kind of done on these legacy sequel things. It's just not something I'm all that interested in. So I didn't have this at the top of my list to watch. I was seeing, it was kind of, the reviews for it were mixed in terms of like going on Letterboxd and seeing what people that I follow on Letterboxd, what they thought of it. Some really enjoyed it. Some kind of gave it like a 2, 1.5. There were a lot of 3s, a lot of in the middle there. So it sounded like people were having a fun time with it, and I was thinking like maybe eventually I'll get to it. But then when I decided to do it for the DTVC Extra series here, part of the reason why I did this series was because I liked the first 2 so much. And so I wanted to kind of then see this one in that context here and give it a try. And to be honest, I think that the 2-hour runtime is a little bit scary. It's not as obtrusive as a 2-hour runtime usually is, but it's a little unwieldy. I mean, the fact that the other 3 could be done in a $1.45 means this probably could have been in that range there as well. But I think some of the things that they do correct from the first movie, we have an inspired Eddie Murphy. He's really into this and wants to do this movie. We get John Ashton back. He's there. Bronson Pinchot is back. Although he was in 3, but he wasn't in 2, right? So we do bring him in. Paul Reiser is back. The music, right? They bring in the music from the old film, but not only they bring in the music from the old film. So we get Shakedown, we get The Heat Is On, we get Neutron Dance, but also the backing music between things, sometimes that also feels 80s. Now, at the same time, we get crap that I didn't need, right? I don't need Little Nas X. What am I doing with Little Nas X? Why are you giving me that? That's not anything that I'm here to listen to. The fact that the Billy Idol Hot in the City had to be remixed with a rapper rapping over it, I'm not sure that I needed that either. So when the music was good, it was good. But like for example, when they had a new song, when they had like for example Mary J. Blige, which wasn't, it's newer, right? It's new compared to those ones. It was also kind of a poignant moment between Eddie Murphy and his daughter, who again was played by Taylor Page. But again, overall, I don't need Little Nas X. I don't need remixed hip hop versions of Billy Idol. Just give me those songs. I needed, what I really needed was I needed the songs from the Patti LaBelle songs from the first movies. I need some of that stuff. Throw in more of that in this film. Give me a little bit. And maybe there's a sense of we don't want to hit you over the head with too much nostalgia. We want to give you just enough to keep you interested. But yeah, I appreciated that there. Again, we get a good baddie here. They bring in Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon works. And what I liked about the Kevin Bacon piece that really worked. Maybe I should do. Why don't I do a synopsis? Let me get in on that before I start talking about what I liked and didn't like about the movie. This takes place again. This is the modern day. This is 30 years after the previous film, and what's his name? Axel Foley is still working as a Detroit detective. Now his boss is Paul Reiser. Paul Reiser's now taken over Gil Hill's role in the police department. Eddie Murphy or Axel Foley, he's still cop on the edge. He's still destroying things. He's still making scenes, but he's still bringing in the baddies too, right? His daughter is a public defender out in Beverly Hills, also a really, really expensive defense attorney in Beverly Hills. And she gets referred to do pro bono work for a client that she thinks has been set up, that he's accused of killing a cop, and the friend that referred her thinks that actually he's being set up, that he didn't really kill the cop, which it turns out that's the case. Turns out the friend is Billy Rosewood, Judge Reinhold. He's working as a private detective now. The daughter gets threatened by these baddies, the ones that really did the killing, and Reinhold calls in Foley and says, "Hey, you got to go out there. You got to come out here and help your daughter, help Jane, because she's in trouble." Now they have an estranged relationship. They haven't spoken in years, so when he shows up, she's very resistant to his help. She doesn't want his help. But after a couple times of them almost dying, she agrees to help. And then we also have a detective, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who is kind of a jerk to start with, but also had a relationship with Jane at one time, with Taylor Page. So he's also on this case. He had been working on this case before. And when Kevin Bacon's introduced, he's introduced because John Ashton is sort of the chief of the Beverly Hills Police Department. He likes Kevin Bacon. He brought him up through the department. He taught him everything he knows, that kind of deal. But Joseph Gordon-Levitt's kind of been working on this case about this killed cop and all of that. And so between him and the fact that Eddie Murphy doesn't trust Kevin Bacon, he knows he's wearing Gucci shoes, the two of them are kind of working together on this. And of course, when Ashton finds out, he suspends Levitt and tells Murphy he's got to get out of Dodge or whatever, because he likes Kevin Bacon. And there's no way Kevin Bacon could be dirty. But everybody else knows that Kevin Bacon is dirty. So that's kind of it. Now it's just about like, I completely forgot that Judge Reinhold's gone missing. He's been captured by Kevin Bacon and his goons, and he's being held somewhere because there's a MacGuffin, right? There's an SD card that everybody wants to find that has evidence of who really killed this cop. And so that's the other thing. We got to find Rosewood. We got to find the SD card. Maybe we find both. Ideally, you'd like to find both. Eventually, everybody gets together. We have a big shootout in a mansion, a la the first film, and we live happily ever after. And that is the movie. This one worked a little bit better for me than the third one. I enjoyed it. It's interesting, right? It's interesting to go 30 years between movies and come in here and figure out what we're going to do. It's some of the things I thought that were interesting. I like the fact that all of the scams that Eddie Murphy's character ran didn't work in the modern day, but that like his daughter knew how to run them better than him. And so she would kind of come in a lot of times and clean up his messes when he was doing a poor job of it. So that kind of thing I liked. There were a lot of callbacks to the earlier movies. Like he gets a room in the same hotel from the first movie. That room was $240 in the first movie. 40 years later, it's $900. Kind of how inflation is. Also, it's a little higher, I think, than inflation. But either way, I think for inflation, I think it would be like 600 a night, but I could be wrong. But same idea, that kind of fun stuff. Kevin Bacon's a great baddie. I mean, he is as smarmy as it gets, but he's also Kevin Bacon smarmy, which is a lot of fun. I was trying to think what his best baddie was. I still like Sebastian Shaw in X-Men First Class, but this is right up there. And again, this is recovering from the previous film where we had trouble with our baddie. So the fact that you got that there, I think is good. Ashton's Taggart, that one was a character I had a little trouble with. Because I think with the history that he's had with Eddie Murphy, or with Axel Foley, and the history with Reinhold, with Billy Rosewood, I don't think he would be taking Kevin Bacon's side as easily as he does. I don't think he'd be suspending Joseph Gordon-Levitt the way he does. I don't think he'd be making it difficult for Eddie Murphy to get the job done the way he does. I just don't see that. I think if Judge Reinhold was missing, or Billy Rosewood was missing, he'd want to do everything he could to find him just as much as the other guys did. It's almost like they forgot how much history they had in those first two movies. And sort of the fact that they would also have history kind of throughout those movies. So from a plot standpoint, that didn't work for me. I didn't see that as Ashton's character. And I think with this being his last role, because unfortunately he's no longer with us, with this being his last role in the films, I would have liked better for him. I would have liked for him to be like, whatever you need, Axel Foley, whatever you need, going in and helping him out. Doing everything that he could. I think that didn't work for me as much. It didn't fit his character from the previous movies. His character was a real man of honor. When you think of that first film where he's there with Bogomil, and they just got out of the strip club at they busted the guys trying to rob the strip club, and Eddie Murphy or Axel, he's doing this whole story about how Taggart and Rosewood, they were the ones who sussed this out, and they were the ones who did this, and Taggart says no, that's not how it went down. Foley sussed it all out. Foley did it all himself. We were just there as backup for him, but it was really his bust. That kind of guy wouldn't, maybe you do. Maybe you lose your way over 30 or 40 years, right? Maybe you do lose your way, and maybe you aren't the same person. I don't know. I feel like, yes, eventually he does come around, but I think he would have come around much quicker. So that didn't exactly work for me there. But, I love the action sequences. If you want to get me into a movie, right? If you're trying to get Matt into a movie, I think we've talked about this before. I'm a huge hockey fan. Love the NHL. Just the reason why this podcast is on Friday and not on Thursday is that I was going to see an NHL hockey game with the New York Islanders team. I'd never seen them play before, so I was taking the train up there. Quite an ordeal because my train from Philly to New York was canceled, so I had to take the commuter rail from Philly to Trenton, another commuter rail from Trenton to New York City, and then I was already planning to take the commuter rail from New York City to where the Islanders play. It's at Elmont Station. I'm not sure exactly where that is, and it's on Long Island. So that's why they're the New York Islanders, right? They play on Long Island. But anyway, so it was a bit of an ordeal. It was kind of a short. I watched this movie. I got back after the game. I got back to Philly at like 1:30 in the morning, and I was going to try to fall asleep watching this movie. I ended up I think I was so jazzed from watching the game and traveling and all that stuff that I couldn't settle down, and I just watched the whole thing. But we get that opening sequence there where they're in NHL arena. I love NHL. The reason why Sudden Death is my favorite Van Damme movie is because it takes place in a hockey arena. It takes place with hockey. That's why it's my favorite exploding helicopter. Hockey plus the fact that you have Powers Booth, right? Whenever you have a plural first name and hockey with an exploding helicopter, that's just a combination that's just always going to work for me. You have Wings Hauser, at an LA Kings game and an exploding helicopter, that would work for me too. Any of that combination is just always, that's a beautiful, it's a trifecta that we've only really seen once. We'll probably never see it again unless, again, some enterprising filmmaker out there does exactly what I described there. Wings Hauser, LA Kings game, exploding helicopter. It could happen, right? Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, this movie's starting out with an NHL game. I've never seen a game in Detroit before. I've seen the Red Wings play. They're actually playing here next week, and I'm kind of thinking about going to the game depending on if the price gets down low because they have a player for their team, Patrick Kane, who used to play with the Chicago Blackhawks. And Patrick Kane is on the top 10 of active players for most goals. And so I'm trying to see if I can see how many of those players on that list I can go see. I think I've seen like 5 of them. And so he's on that list. The number 1 is Ovechkin. I saw him recently playing here, the Capitals, Washington Capitals, he plays where they were playing the Philadelphia Flyers here. But the Red Wings, they're, legacy team, original 6 team, been around for a long time. That arena, I'd love to go see a game there. I've never been to Detroit, period. I've flown into their airport. I've switched planes in Detroit, but I've never actually been to Detroit. So love to see a baseball game there. Love to see a hockey game. But NHL hockey, for people outside the U.S., especially if you're not like from Sweden, or some of the other Scandinavian countries, that I guess Sweden is the one, right? I don't think Denmark or Norway. Finland has a good team, but I don't know if they chart well on our podcast the way Sweden does. But if you're a big hockey, or if you're curious when you come to the United States, hockey is a really fascinating sport to go see a game of. I did meet a woman from Australia who was traveling throughout the U.S. and Canada who was going to see multiple games. I think she started in like Calgary and made her way up to Philadelphia. We were watching the Maple Leafs that they were playing, and I was telling her like the Maple Leafs are kind of like one of the big teams. They're like I guess they're kind of like the Cubs maybe, whereas the Canadians would be like the Yankees. And I guess if you're comparing English Premier League, it'd be like Liverpool and Man United maybe, something like that. But anyway. Yeah, so the Red Wings, though, they're one of those big franchises. They have a really strong fan base in Detroit. And so seeing that sequence there was really fantastic. They also play on the racial piece of hockey. So if you're thinking about the sports here in America, the NFL is the number 1 sport. It's the biggest one. It is the closest to like the EPL in the sense that it's it's like a year-round, 12-month of the year sport. You've got the actual season. You've got the draft when they draft the players. You've got training camps, preseason. Pretty much the conversation goes on year-round, the same way it does for the EPL. The NBA basketball, that's probably your next biggest one. And I would say, while the fan base for the NFL is universal, I think the NBA has the most diverse, welcoming atmosphere. When you go to an NBA game, you've got people of all backgrounds, all ethnicities going to see the game, and there's always a sense that everybody's welcome. And I don't know if that's the case for all the other sports, but definitely basketball has that feel, and it's the number 2 sport in America. Baseball is kind of more this old pastime kind of thing. I love baseball as well. I always talk about baseball here, and it's a very fun sport. It's skews a little bit more conservative, but the ballparks are a lot of fun. But also, a lot of the people who go to baseball games are going for a ballpark experience. It's like a night out at the ballpark. So it's a little bit unique there in that sense. For football, it's more hardcore fans that go see a professional football game live because the let's just watch a game, they watch it at home. And NBA, again, it's like a night out kind of thing a lot of times, but you do get some fans there. The NHL is the 4th of the 4 sports, and generally in communities that like the NHL in America. Now in Canada, every city that has the NHL, that is their number 1 sport. It's the number 1 sport in Canada, and it's the number 1 team there. In America, a lot of times when you have a hockey team, they're usually the 4th of the 4 sports if they have 4 in that city. And it's not a niche fandom. It's more like this very small, segmented fandom. Now, here in Philadelphia, I will say one of the things that makes Philadelphia unique about hockey fandom is it is a diverse fandom. It's not just white conservative. For example, that Islanders game I went to, I didn't see very many people that were just whites and again, it felt like it skewed more white conservative there. Boston games. When I was growing up in Boston, there was this sort of coded language when you talk about hockey and basketball that I didn't pick up on until I got older. But essentially, if you ask somebody, hockey or basketball, when they would say hockey, there was this sort of coded sort of, I don't say racist, go fully that far, but it was like a sense of I don't like basketball, not coming out saying because all the players are African Americans, but more like it's I don't like basketball because they're really showboaty, or it's just there's too many fouls or whatever. They'll have a reason why. They're all kind of one-on-one, that kind of thing. I'm more of a hockey fan, I liked basketball when Larry Bird played, but really I'm more of a hockey fan. That kind of coded language, all of that stuff. So there is a lot of sort of conversation about race with hockey. And of course, in Canada, it's a different conversation because in Canada, I mean, there's a lot of racism. I don't know how much what it's like now, but I remember there's a Haitian born, or I think he was the son of Haitian immigrants in Montreal who became an NHL player. And he talked about his experience and said, I read the Jackie Robinson book, talking about in the 40s here in America, saying, yeah, it was the same experience for me in in the 90s coming up as an NHL player in Montreal. That I was experiencing the same thing as Jackie Robinson integrating baseball in the 40s and 50s. So, I don't know how much that's still like that because there are a lot of players, of diverse backgrounds. For example, like Texas Rain or not, sorry, Dallas Stars, not Texas. Dallas Stars. They have a player who's of Filipino descent. Obviously many African American, African Canadian players in the league. Austin Matthews, who plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's of Mexican descent. So it is becoming more diverse, but in this film, right, I'm kind of a long way for me to get to this point where in the film, this young rookie detective who Eddie Murphy has come with him to the game to do this bust, he says to Eddie Murphy, I didn't really think you'd like hockey, right? Which is kind of the same as, me growing up hearing people in the Boston area saying, I'm not really a basketball fan, right? I didn't really think you'd like it. And he goes, well, why wouldn't I like hockey? Why would you say that? Why would you think I wouldn't like hockey? And it's, well, I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, then of course Eddie Murphy does this big joke routine about the Negro Hockey League and all that. Now, I would say, I think one of the first African-American players in the NHL played for the Bruins, and he had his number retired and all that. So hockey I think it was more integrated. Just, there weren't a lot of, I think in Canada there were more people from diverse backgrounds playing, whereas in America, I think partly it was the money factor. You didn't have a lot of poor, either, people of any backgrounds playing the sport because it was an expensive sport to play. But he's making this whole big joke about the Negro NHL League or the Negro Hockey League, and the guy kind of just, at first he's like all embarrassed and he feels bad, and then he realizes that Eddie Murphy's just messing with him. But yeah, I kind of love that whole interplay there. All of that works. And of course, having a shootout or a fight in a hockey arena, always going to work for me. Always fantastic. So I love that there. Again, I love the use of the old music. That was really good. I also, it was interesting that the interplay with the daughter. So I was curious because they didn't get into a lot of it, but I'm assuming I guess he would have met the woman that he had his daughter with. He would have met her after Beverly Hills Cop 3. So, it wasn't Teresa Randall, even though he hooked up with her after Beverly Hills Cop 3. At least I don't think so. But they were living in Detroit, and then he said he had to move the wife and daughter to Beverly Hills so they'd be safe because the 12th Street Mafia wanted to threatened his family. But then that's sort of how they become estranged. And there is a sense that he just didn't handle it well. He wasn't very mature about it, but he doesn't want to admit it. And so there's a sense, okay, when you're going to admit that you were wrong there. I think one thing I like about Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, he's a jerk police officer to start with, but then kind of becomes a little bit better. He has the turn a little bit faster than Taggart, which I think helps him out more there, but I appreciate that. I mean, I love that one of Eddie Murphy's daughters played the jerk cops that arrest him, because again, they're kind of playing off that first film where he gets arrested. And they kind of do something similar there, right? He gets thrown out of a window and he gets arrested. He's getting shot at now and he gets arrested, and so I like that. But I also like the fact that we have jerk cops, but it's his daughter playing one of the jerk cops, which I thought was a good turn there. The movie overall though I think works pretty well. I mean, for a 2-hour movie, it does. I think. It does organically work well enough in the sort of like the MacGuffin and trying to solve the crime that I appreciated it enough, but. Yeah, I don't necessarily need 2 hours. I could have done this if you're going to pad out the movie, right? If you're going to do 155 or whatever this thing clocked in at, if you're going to go that long, just give me more hockey, right? That's what I want. I need longer hockey sequences. I don't need the other stuff that might have been in there. Just give me more of that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess the other thing I kind of had to get used to is that the earlier films felt 80s, and of course the 90s one felt 90s, and so now I've got to watch something that is supposed to feel 2020s but is hearkening back to all these old things from before, which I thought was kind of interesting that they did it that way. But you've got that washed out digital film that they use for this, which I think is again, it's not something I always enjoy seeing, but I guess it worked enough. It worked enough for that kind of thing. But it did give it more of that feel of like I'm watching a legacy sequel kind of thing. So I don't know. I think what I was seeing on Letterboxd was a lot of 3 stars, and I think that's probably where I would put this. I'd put it in a good 3-star category. So when I'm ranking these 4 movies, I mean, number one is just out there. Number one by far. It is. Again, I have it as maybe my favorite action movie ever. I'll have to see Commando again to kind of see where I put that. Number 2 is right there underneath it. It's really close. It's like maybe 5 and 4.5, 5 and 4, something like that. 3 definitely falls off. I mean, you're talking like 2.5 maybe in that sense, and then this is a good 3. So maybe this is like a half star better than part 3, because part 3 again had some real inspired moments, and it's 15 minutes shorter, which. Again, if you're gonna give me a longer movie with hockey in it, just give me more hockey. That's all I need there. But I guess that's that's good. So, I think we got enough here on this. I think waiting 30 years, and I don't say it's funny say we waited 30 years for this movie. I wasn't really waiting for another Beverly Hills Cop movie. I think I was cool enough with the fact that we had 3 Beverly Hills Cop movies. I didn't. It wasn't like I was eagerly anticipating. I was like reading the trade publications be like, when is the new Beverly Hills Cop movie coming out? That kind of thing. So I shouldn't say I was waiting 30 years for it, but if you felt like you had to make another Beverly Hills Cop movie 30 years later, and I believe one of the things for Eddie Murphy, one of the reasons why he did make this movie, and he had wanted to make it, was he wanted to correct the ills of Part 3. And I don't know necessarily that he corrected the ills of Part 3. I think he turns in a better performance here than he did in Part 3. So in that sense, maybe, it is turning into better. It is correcting the ills of Part 3. But I think it's almost, there's so much nostalgia for Parts 1 and 2 that I don't know that he's correcting the ills as much as he's bringing us back to a movie that we really liked. But I think, again, it's on Netflix as a Netflix streamer. Already subscribed to Netflix, so that's not a bad deal. And I think they're going to put the 5th one out on that as well, but they are looking to do a 5th movie. So, yeah, I think, I'm good with it. I could go for a little less Nas X. Again, yeah, hey, for the 5th movie, just as an idea, maybe do more hockey, less little Nas X. That could work, right? That might be a good one. And again, it doesn't have to be hockey. I'd be perfectly fine if you wanted to have some baseball in there. You wanted to have some NFL football, or he's a Detroit fan. Detroit's doing well this year. You could have that. Though they played it dumb. If you're going to do more Detroit, basketball, I always loved Detroit. That would be great if you do some flashback scenes to the old bad boy Pistons in the late 80s, early 90s, right? Because that's something that they never really put into these movies, is that, when he was coming up in Detroit, he's wearing the Lions gear, and the Lions weren't really that good. They had Barry Sanders, especially for Part 3, and he was a really fun player. But the Detroit Pistons, they were the big deal. Though, actually, that's not true, right? Because 84, when the first movie comes out, the Detroit Tigers won the World Series. They had a massively dominant team that year. They were an all-time team, and so they kind of ran away with it. I think they were like a wire-to-wire finishing team. So I was 5. I don't really remember that team. I just know kind of historically. I remember watching players from those teams play the Red Sox because they played in the same division at that time. So my earliest memories of baseball, those Tigers teams definitely, they weren't fun when the Red Sox had to go play in Detroit. They were a good team. So it is interesting we get the Detroit Lions as the team when they were like kind of the worst of the Detroit teams, and still kind of. Right now they're poised to maybe win the Super Bowl this year. So which they haven't won anything since like the 50s. I think that was the last time that they've won anything. So it's been a long time. Whereas like the Red Wings were winning Stanley Cups in the 90s into the early 2000s. So I think their last one they won was 08. So I think they won in 08, and then they played the Penguins in 09 and lost to the Penguins in 09. But that was like their last time they were a really, really great team that was kind of on the cusp of winning things. And the Detroit Tigers baseball team now really, they actually did pretty good last year. They made it to the second round of the playoffs. So they did pretty good last year. But yeah, anyway, I'm kind of going off track on sports stuff here. But yeah, little less Nas X, little more sports. That combination always works well for me. And hey, you want to bring in Wings Hauser. Maybe that's what this 5th movie needs, right? It needs more hockey with Wings Hauser and an exploding helicopter. Give us that trio there. Let's get that trifecta, something that I could always use. Again, give me that second time that we get a plural first name, an exploding helicopter, and hockey. that would work for me. So maybe that's what we'll get in the fifth movie, but I don't know. But yeah, this was a lot of fun going through these movies. I think I was reminded how much I love the first two. I think, I realized watching the third one that I hadn't seen it before, which was an interesting revelation, but discovering that. And then coming back to this legacy sequel here, 30 years after that one, that was kind of an interesting experience as well. And again, definitely now I feel like I got to go up to Detroit and go see a game at the Little Caesars Arena. That's where the Detroit Red Wings play. Catch a game there. But yeah, we'll take one more break here, and then when we come back, we will wrap this up.
My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle.
All right, we are back, and why don't we wrap this up? So you may have noticed that in this episode we had two promos, right? The usual two promos, the Bainbridge promo and the Don's House in the Mountains promo. So I actually have a new book out that is so new that I don't even have a promo cut for it yet. It is Nadia and Aiden. So you can find the link to Nadia and Aiden in this the podcast description here. Pick that up. I think it's $10.99 on paperback is what I set it at. $3.99 on Kindle, because it is a little bit shorter than my usual book, so it's more of a novella about two fraternal twins who raised in Paris by their mom, who's originally from South Philadelphia. When they turn 20, they decide they want to come to America, get in touch with their American heritage. And so they kind of have some kind of interesting adventures. On the cover, you'll notice it's the two of them are playing instruments. Nadia's playing the saxophone. Aiden's playing the trumpet. That's because they're kind of paying their way across the country as jazz musicians, getting gigs in clothing stores, a yarn shop in one case, that kind of thing. And so as they're paying their way across the country and they're kind of engaging in all these interesting things, they start to take on the book takes place in 2008. So they become like a MySpace / YouTube viral sensation. So when they culminate the trip in Vegas, they're this big deal. They've got their own residency there for a short period, that kind of thing. So, definitely, I always appreciate it if you want to check that out. The link will be in the podcast description. Again, it's Nadia and Aiden. But yeah, I think that is everything. So again, this is our last DTVC Extra, at least for this year. But the main podcast is going to keep going. So look for episodes every Tuesday night, Eastern Time U.S., maybe Wednesday morning your time, depending on where you're listening to us. Always, check us out. We're on Blue Sky and Facebook and Instagram. So for the latest news, you can always kind of check us there to see if there's any delays or any reasons why I'm not putting up podcasts as much as I should, or blog posts, same thing. But yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon. All right, bye everyone.